The Galactic Council chamber hummed with the low vibrations of 1,000 different species breathing, chittering, and communicating in ways that defied conventional understanding. Ambassador Zeth Ka of the Vorthak Empire adjusted his crystalline sensory apparatus as he reviewed the data streams flowing across his neural interface. The morning briefing had been particularly tedious, filled with trade disputes between the Rigelian consortiums and mining rights arguments in the outer spiral. But today's agenda contained something unusual. Item 774, announced Council Speaker Meryl Oss, her gelatinous form rippling with official authority. Archaeological findings from the frontier sectors, presenting evidence, Explorer Captain Yix Knoll of the Independent Survey Corps. Captain Yix Knoll approached the central platform, his 6 legs clicking against the polished floor. The insectoid explorer's compound eyes glittered with what his species conveyed as excitement. Behind him, holographic displays materialized, showing star charts, planetary surveys, and most intriguingly, ruins. Honored Council, Yix Knoll began, his translator rendering his chittering into standard galactic. 3 cycles ago, my expedition discovered something extraordinary in the forbidden zone of Sector 7 Alpha. We found ruins, ancient ruins that predate any known civilization by millions of years. A ripple of interest passed through the assembly. The forbidden zone had been declared off-limits for 3,000 years, ever since the last great war between the hegemony and the old Terran Empire. Most species avoided it, believing it cursed or contaminated. The structures, Yix Knoll continued, show evidence of incredible engineering capabilities. Metal alloys we cannot replicate, energy signatures that still pulse after eons of abandonment, and most fascinating of all, hieroglyphic inscriptions that reference something called humans. Ambassador Zeth Ka's attention sharpened. Humans were a myth, a legend told to children across a dozen worlds. According to the stories, they were a warrior species of impossible cunning and ferocity, capable of surviving in environments that would kill most civilized beings. They were said to fight with primitive weapons, yet somehow defeat technologically superior forces through sheer determination and tactical brilliance. Captain, interrupted Counselor Vex Thule of the Andromedean Alliance, her tentacles writhing with skepticism, surely you do not suggest these mythical humans actually existed? They are folklore, stories created to explain ancient conflicts we no longer understand. That is what I believed as well, Yix Knoll admitted. Until we translated the inscriptions, they tell of great battles, of ships that moved like living things through space, of a species that refused to surrender even when facing extinction. The ruins we found, Honored Counselor, match the descriptions in our oldest legends perfectly. The chamber erupted in discussion. Species that rarely agreed on anything found themselves debating the existence of humans with surprising passion. The Vorthak maintained they were impossible biological anomalies. The Zephyrians insisted they were metaphorical constructs representing chaos. The Crystalline Collective calculated their existence as statistically improbable. "Show them the weapons cache," came a voice from the back of the chamber. All eyes turned to see High Archivist Kolvraxi of the Eternal Library, one of the oldest beings in known space. His metal frame, ancient beyond measure, clicked and whirred as he approached the platform. Few dared question his knowledge of galactic history. "High Archivist," Speaker Meryl Oss acknowledged with visible respect. "You have insight into these findings?" "I have more than insight," Kolvraxi replied, his voice carrying the weight of millennia. "I was there when the last humans disappeared. Captain Yix Knoll, show them what you found in the lower chambers of those ruins." With obvious reluctance, Yix Knoll activated another holographic display. The image showed a vast underground chamber filled with row upon row of metal objects. They looked crude compared to modern energy weapons, Yet something about their design suggested lethal efficiency. Kinetic projectile weapons, Yixnol explained. Completely primitive by our standards. They use chemical explosions to launch solid metal projectiles at high velocity. Our scientists estimate they could barely penetrate the armor of a scout shuttle. Yet, Kolvraxi interjected, those weapons helped humanity hold off 3 galactic empires simultaneously for over 2 centuries. They called them guns, and in human hands, they were more dangerous than our most advanced plasma cannons. The chamber fell silent. The idea that primitive kinetic weapons could be effective against modern technology seemed absurd. High Archivist, Ambassador Zeth Ka spoke carefully. Are you suggesting that humans were real? That they actually existed in our galaxy? I am not suggesting anything, Kolvraxi replied. I am stating a fact. Humans were real. They built an empire that spanned 47 systems. They developed technology that we still do not fully understand, and when 16 different species formed an alliance specifically to destroy them, they fought back with everything they had. But that is impossible, protested Counselor Vex Thul. No single species could stand against such odds. The mathematics alone— Mathematics, Kolvraxi said with what might have been amusement, meant very little to humans. They had a saying, the difficult we do immediately. The impossible just takes a little longer. They turned mathematical impossibilities into tactical advantages. Captain Yixnol shifted nervously on his 6 legs. High Archivist, if humans were so formidable, what happened to them? Why are there no traces of their civilization beyond these ruins? The ancient beings' optical sensors dimmed slightly. They were betrayed by those they trusted. The species they had protected, the worlds they had defended, all turned against them when the Alliance offered better trade agreements and promises of shared technology. Humanity found themselves fighting not just external enemies, but former allies who knew their defensive positions and supply routes. Even then, he continued, they did not surrender. They evacuated their civilians to hidden colonies and fought a guerrilla war that lasted another 50 years. But eventually, superior numbers and betrayal took their toll. The last human fleet disappeared into the dark nebula, and we assumed they had finally been destroyed. Assumed? Ambassador Zeth Ka caught the word immediately. We never found bodies, Kolvraxi admitted. We never found their ships. We never found their final colonies. They simply vanished. The Alliance declared victory, divided up human territory, and agreed to erase all records of their existence. It was easier to pretend they had never lived than to admit what we had done to them. The implications hung heavy in the air. Every species in the chamber belonged to governments that had either participated in or benefited from the destruction of humanity. Their modern prosperity was built on the ashes of a civilization they had chosen to forget. But this is ancient history, Speaker Miral Oss said, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Humans, if they ever existed, have been gone for 3,000 years. These archaeological findings, while interesting, have no bearing on current galactic affairs. Perhaps, Kolvraxi agreed. Though I wonder what you make of the energy signatures Captain Yixnol detected. The ones that suggest those ruins are not as abandoned as they appear. Yixnol's compound eyes widened. He had mentioned the energy readings in his report, but had assumed they were residual power from ancient systems slowly decaying. The High Archivist's comment suggested a more disturbing possibility. You think something is still active in those ruins? The insectoid explorer asked. I think, Kolvraxi said slowly, that humans were very good at long-term planning, and very good at holding grudges. Before anyone could respond, the chamber's communication array activated. A priority signal was coming through from the Deep Space Monitoring Network, the automated system that watched the galaxy's most remote regions for signs of piracy or invasion. The signal was garbled, filled with static and interference that made translation difficult, but certain words came through clearly. Unknown ships, massive formation, approaching from dark nebula, request immediate assistance. Then the signal cut to silence. Speaker Miral Oss immediately activated the emergency protocols. Within moments, data began flowing in from monitoring stations across the galaxy. What they revealed sent waves of shock through the assembled delegates. A fleet was indeed approaching from the dark nebula, moving at speeds that defied current understanding of faster-than-light travel. The ships were unlike anything in modern galactic databases, their designs suggesting both advanced technology and battlefield-tested durability. Most unsettling of all, they were broadcasting identification codes that had not been seen for 3,000 years. Human identification codes. Ambassador Zeth Ka felt his crystalline sensory apparatus trembling as he processed the information. "High Archivist, you said humans were extinct." "I said we assumed they were extinct," Kolvraxi corrected. "It appears we were wrong. The question now is, what do they want?" As if summoned by his words, the chamber's main communication array activated again. This time, the signal was crystal clear, broadcast on frequencies that had been reserved for diplomatic communication in the old days of the Terran Empire. The voice that emerged was distinctly human, speaking in the ancient Earth language that translators struggled to render properly. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Federation Navy, commanding the 1st Expeditionary Fleet. We are approaching the former coordinates of the Galactic Council. We wish to discuss the current state of our former territory and the fate of our colonies. We also wish to discuss reparations for 3,000 years of illegal occupation." The chamber erupted in chaos. Species that had maintained dignity for millennia began shouting at each other in languages that translators could not keep pace with. Some demanded immediate military action. Others called for evacuation. A few suggested attempting to negotiate. Above it all, Admiral Chen's voice continued with mechanical precision. "We will arrive at the Council Station in 72 hours. We suggest you prepare appropriate reception protocols. We have much to discuss." The signal ended, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. High Archivist Kolvraxi's optical sensors brightened with what might have been satisfaction. "I told you humans were good at long-term planning," he said quietly. "Did you really think a species that survived 16 different extinction attempts would stay hidden forever?" Ambassador Zeth Ka realized that everything was about to change. The myths had returned, and they carried weapons that could light up the void of space. The galaxy was about to rediscover why humanity had once been feared across 47 systems, and this time they would not be caught by surprise. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the TFS Indomitable, watching the massive view screen display the approach to Galactic Council Station. The orbital platform had grown significantly since the old days, now bristling with defensive installations and docking facilities for a dozen different species. It was impressive, she had to admit, but it lacked the elegant brutality that had characterized Terran engineering. "Admiral," called Commander James Park from the tactical station, "long-range sensors are detecting significant military buildup around the station. Looks like they're trying to assemble a defensive fleet." Sarah allowed herself a thin smile. "How many ships, Commander?" "Approximately 400 vessels from 12 different species, ma'am. Mixed classes, from patrol boats to heavy cruisers. They're maintaining formation at approximately 50,000 kilometers from the station." 400 ships, mused Captain Rodriguez from the engineering station. "That's almost insulting. Do they think we learned nothing in 3,000 years?" Sarah turned to study the tactical display. The enemy fleet was arranged in a standard defensive formation that had been taught in galactic military academies for centuries. It was efficient, well-coordinated, and completely predictable. She had studied similar formations as a cadet at the restored Terran Naval Academy on New Earth, learning them as examples of how not to fight humanity. Signal the fleet, she ordered. All ships maintain current formation and speed. No aggressive actions unless fired upon first. We are here to talk, not to fight. Ma'am, interrupted Lieutenant Kim from the communications station. We're receiving multiple broadcast signals from the station. They're demanding we halt our approach and submit to inspection protocols. Are they now? Sarah said, her voice carrying just a hint of amusement. Open a channel, Lieutenant. Let's remind them who they're talking to. The main screen shifted to show the interior of the council chamber, where hundreds of beings from across the galaxy had gathered in emergency session. Sarah could see the fear in their various forms of body language, despite their attempts to project authority. "This is Admiral Chen," she began, her voice carrying the weight of command trained into her over decades of service. "I appreciate your concern for security, but I'm afraid our ships will not be submitting to any inspection protocols. We are returning to reclaim what was stolen from us, not to request permission to exist." The response came from what appeared to be a crystalline being whose light patterns indicated extreme agitation. "Admiral Chen, I am Ambassador Zethka of the Vorthak Empire. You must understand that your approach is causing significant alarm throughout the galaxy. Perhaps if you would consent to sending a smaller delegation—" "Ambassador," Sarah interrupted smoothly, "I'm sure you understand that trust is something that must be earned. Given that the last time humanity trusted the galaxy, we were betrayed and nearly exterminated, I'm sure you can appreciate our caution. We will approach as planned." Another voice cut through the transmission, this one belonging to a tentacled being whose translator rendered her words with obvious strain. "Admiral, this is Counselor Vex Thule. We must protest this show of force. The presence of your fleet constitutes a clear threat to galactic peace." Sarah's expression hardened. "Counselor, with respect, humanity had no interest in threatening galactic peace 3,000 years ago either. That didn't stop 16 species from forming an alliance specifically to destroy us. Forgive me if I prefer to negotiate from a position of strength this time." "Admiral," came a new voice, metallic and ancient. "This is High Archivist Kolvraxi. I was present during the last days of the human conflict. May I ask how your people survived?" Sarah's demeanor softened slightly. She had studied the records of Kolvraxi, one of the few beings who had opposed the genocide, even when it was politically dangerous to do so. "High Archivist, your reputation precedes you. Your efforts to preserve human cultural artifacts did not go unnoticed. As for how we survived, we did what humans have always done. We adapted." Commander Park approached the Admiral with a datapad. "Ma'am, passive scans of the defensive fleet are complete. Their weapon systems are powered but not locked on. However, I'm detecting some interesting energy signatures from their larger vessels." Sarah glanced at the report and raised an eyebrow. "It seems our friends have been busy. That's hegemony-class plasma cannon technology, isn't it? And those energy shields look like they're based on Zephyrian crystal matrix designs." "Yes, ma'am. They've been combining technologies from different species, creating hybrid systems that are actually quite effective." "Effective against each other, perhaps," Sarah mused. "The question is how effective they'll be against us. Have they done anything that would actually surprise a human engineer?" "Not really, Admiral. Their approach is still based on overwhelming firepower and defensive positioning." "Very predictable." Sarah nodded and turned back to the communication channel. "High Archivist, I believe you were asking about human survival. The short answer is that we learned from our mistakes. When your alliance drove us from our colonies, we didn't simply run away and hide. We spent 3,000 years preparing for our return." "Preparing how?" The question came from multiple sources simultaneously. "We established hidden colonies in places you would never think to look. We developed new technologies based on principles you consider impossible. Most importantly, we studied you, all of you. We learned your weaknesses, your political structures, your military doctrines. We know exactly how you think, how you fight, and how you fail. The assembled aliens exchanged nervous glances that were visible even across species barriers. Sarah could see the calculations running through their minds. If humanity had been studying them for 3 millennia, what advantages might they have gained? Perhaps, suggested Ambassador Zethka carefully, we could arrange for a proper diplomatic meeting. Surely there's no need for this level of military posturing. Sarah smiled, and something in that expression made several species simultaneously step back from their communication devices. Ambassador, this isn't military posturing. This is military courtesy. If we wanted to demonstrate our capabilities, we would have approached differently. As if summoned by her words, the sensor readings on every ship in the system suddenly went haywire. New contacts were appearing on their displays, seemingly materializing out of empty space. The hidden ships that revealed themselves were larger than anything in the current galactic fleet, their hulls bearing the distinctive angular patterns that had once terrorized the nightmares of entire species. "Dear gods," whispered Counselor Vex Thul, her tentacles writhing in terror. "How many ships do you have?" "Enough," Sarah replied simply. "The 10 vessels you initially detected were merely our escort. The main fleet has been here for quite some time, watching and waiting. We wanted to see how you would react to our return." The tactical displays throughout the system now showed over 200 human vessels, arranged in formations that seemed to simultaneously threaten every possible escape route while maintaining perfect defensive positioning. The alien defensive fleet, which had seemed substantial moments before, was now hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned. "This is impossible," declared a new voice that Sarah's briefings identified as belonging to Fleet Commander Grixmal of the Rigelian Navy. "Our sensors should have detected your ships. No stealth technology is that advanced." "Commander," Sarah said, her tone carrying a hint of condescension, "your sensors were detecting us. You simply didn't recognize what you were seeing. When we disappeared into the dark nebula 3,000 years ago, we didn't just hide. We learned to become part of the environment. Our ships can mimic cosmic background radiation, asteroid signatures, even the energy patterns of nebula gases. To your sensors, we looked like natural phenomena. The implications were staggering. If human ships could remain undetected while observing their targets, then every military installation, every trade route, every strategic position in the galaxy had potentially been under human surveillance for centuries. "What do you want?" The question came from Speaker Miral Oss, her gelatinous form rippling with barely controlled panic. Sarah considered the question carefully. It was the right question, asked at the right time, the opening she had been waiting for. "We want what was taken from us," she said simply. "Our colonies, our territory, our right to exist in this galaxy. 3,000 years ago, you decided humanity was too dangerous to be allowed to survive. You formed an alliance. You destroyed our worlds. You scattered our people. Now we're back, and we want an accounting." "But surely," Ambassador Zethka began desperately, "there must be room for negotiation. 3,000 years is a long time. The galaxy has changed. We've all changed." "Have you?" Sarah asked pointedly. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're still the same species who decided genocide was an acceptable diplomatic solution. The only difference is that now you're afraid because you're not the ones with the bigger guns." High Archivist Kolvraxi activated his communication system again. "Admiral, what would it take for coexistence? Surely humanity doesn't want another galactic war." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering her words carefully. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 3 millennia of human suffering and determination. "We want formal recognition of the Terran Federation as a sovereign power. We want reparations for the worlds you destroyed and the lives you took. We want our former territories returned to human control. And we want binding guarantees that what happened to us will never happen to any other species." Those are significant demands, Speaker Moralos said carefully. They're not demands, Sarah corrected. They're the opening terms for negotiation. What happens next depends on how reasonable you're prepared to be, because you need to understand something about human nature that you apparently failed to learn 3,000 years ago. She paused, letting the silence build tension throughout the watching galaxy. Humans don't give up. Ever. You can kill us, scatter us, drive us to the edge of extinction, but we will always come back. And when we do, we'll be stronger than we were before. The question isn't whether humanity will reclaim its place in this galaxy. The question is whether that happens through negotiation or through the kind of war that will make your ancestors' genocide attempt look like a minor skirmish. The communication channels fell silent as the assembled aliens processed this ultimatum. They had spent 3,000 years believing they had solved the human problem permanently. Now they were discovering that humans had spent that same time preparing for exactly this moment. Commander Park approached Sarah again. Admiral, we're receiving priority communications from the hidden colonies. Operation Return is proceeding on schedule. The 2nd and 3rd fleets have taken position in the former inner colonies, and the 4th fleet is moving to secure the outer territories. Sarah nodded approvingly. Any resistance? Minimal, ma'am. Most of the current occupying forces are evacuating rather than fighting. It appears our reputation still carries some weight. Good. Signal all fleets to maintain defensive positions but avoid unnecessary destruction. We're not here to repeat their mistakes. She turned back to the communication channel, where the aliens were engaged in heated debate about how to respond to the human ultimatum. I'll give you 6 hours to consider our terms, Sarah announced, cutting through their arguments. After that, we begin reclaiming our territory whether you cooperate or not. I suggest you use that time wisely. The transmission ended, leaving the galaxy's leaders to contemplate a future they had never imagined possible. Humanity had returned, and this time, they held all the advantages. The 6 hours passed in a blur of desperate communications across the galaxy. Emergency sessions convened on every major world as governments tried to comprehend the impossible reality of humanity's return. Some species called for immediate military action, others for diplomatic solutions, and a few for complete evacuation to distant galaxies. Admiral Sarah Chen spent those hours reviewing intelligence reports that painted a picture of a galaxy in chaos. The mere presence of human fleets had triggered market collapses, military mobilizations, and in some cases, complete governmental breakdowns. Species that had built their entire identities around defeating humanity 3 millennia ago now faced the terrifying prospect that their greatest victory had been an illusion. Admiral, reported Commander Park as the deadline approached, we're receiving formal communications from the Galactic Council. They're requesting an extension to consider our terms. Sarah checked the chronometer. They had precisely 47 minutes remaining. Denied. Humanity waited 3,000 years for justice. They can decide in 6 hours whether they want to face us as enemies or attempt to make amends as something approaching allies. Lieutenant Kim looked up from her station. Ma'am, we're also receiving back-channel communications from individual species. The Zephyrians are offering to return 2 of our former colony worlds immediately. The Andromedean Alliance wants to discuss partial territorial concessions, and the Vorthak Empire is, she paused, checking her translation matrix, offering tribute? Tribute? Sarah raised an eyebrow. How wonderfully primitive of them! What kind of tribute? Advanced technological data, rare minerals, and what they're calling suitable compensation for historical oversights. They're being very careful not to admit actual guilt. Captain Rodriguez laughed from his position at the engineering station. Historical oversights. That's what they're calling genocide now. I have to admit their diplomatic language has improved. Sarah studied the tactical display showing the positions of all human fleets throughout the galaxy. The operation was proceeding flawlessly. 3,000 years of planning had created a military machine of unprecedented efficiency. Every major strategic location was now under human control or observation, and the galaxy's defensive fleets were hopelessly outmaneuvered. "Signal from the Fifth Fleet, Admiral," reported the communications officer. "They've reached the hegemony home system. The planetary government is requesting permission to surrender. Tell Admiral Nakamura to accept their surrender and treat prisoners according to the Geneva Conventions. We're not here for revenge, we're here for justice." The distinction was important to Sarah. Revenge would have been satisfying but ultimately self-defeating. Justice, however, would create the foundation for a stable future where humanity could never again be threatened with extinction. "Admiral," Commander Park said quietly, "I'm detecting massive energy buildups from the alien defensive fleet. It looks like they're preparing to fight." Sarah studied the readings with professional interest. The alien fleet was indeed powering up their weapon systems, but their formation remained defensive. They were preparing for a battle they knew they couldn't win, probably hoping to inflict enough damage to force humanity into a more favorable negotiation. "How many ships in their formation now, Commander?" 837 vessels, Admiral. They've been reinforced by emergency response fleets from across the sector. It's actually quite impressive. "It is," Sarah agreed, "and completely pointless. Signal our fleet. Prepare for combat operations, but do not fire unless fired upon. Let's see if they have the courage of their convictions." The next few minutes passed in tense silence as both fleets maneuvered into position. The aliens had adopted a layered defensive formation designed to maximize their firepower while protecting their larger vessels behind screens of smaller craft. It was textbook galactic military doctrine, exactly the kind of predictable strategy that humanity had spent centuries learning to counter. "Incoming communication from the Council," Lieutenant Kim announced. "It's Speaker Miralos." "On screen." The gelatinous leader appeared on the main display, her form rippling with what appeared to be barely controlled terror. Behind her, Sarah could see the chaos of the council chamber as hundreds of species argued, pleaded, and planned in desperation. "Admiral Chen," Speaker Miralos began, her translator struggling with the stress patterns in her voice, "the Council has reached a decision regarding your ultimatum." "I'm listening," Sarah replied, though her attention was partly focused on the tactical display showing the alien fleet's continuing preparations for battle. "We cannot accept your demands in their current form," the speaker continued. "The territorial concessions you request would destabilize the entire galactic political structure. The reparations you seek would bankrupt multiple civilizations. However, we are prepared to offer alternative arrangements." Sarah's expression didn't change, but Commander Park could see the tension in her shoulders. This was the moment they had all been preparing for, the moment when diplomacy would either succeed or fail spectacularly. "What alternative arrangements?" Sarah asked. "We propose the establishment of human autonomous zones within existing territorial boundaries. We offer technological exchanges that would benefit all species. We suggest cultural programs designed to prevent future conflicts. And we propose the creation of a new galactic charter that would protect all species from the kind of treatment humanity experienced." Sarah considered the proposal for exactly 10 seconds. "Unacceptable." "Admiral, please," Speaker Miralos pleaded. "Surely we can reach some accommodation." "Speaker," Sarah interrupted, "let me explain something to you about human nature that you apparently still don't understand. When you form an alliance specifically to exterminate a species, when you hunt down their children and destroy their worlds, when you spend decades systematically erasing their very existence from galactic records, you don't get to offer autonomous zones as compensation." She stood, her command presence filling the bridge and somehow translating through the communication link to intimidate beings dozens of light years away. "We didn't return to negotiate for scraps of our former territory. We return to take back what was stolen and to ensure it never happens again. Your counterproposal tells me that you still don't understand the magnitude of what you did, or the price you're going to pay for it. But, Admiral, came a new voice from the background of the council chamber. Surely you understand that what you're demanding could lead to another galactic war. Millions could die. Sarah's smile was cold as winter space. Counselor Vex Thule, isn't it? Let me tell you what I understand. I understand that 3,000 years ago, millions of humans died because you decided we were inconvenient. I understand that you've spent the last 3 millennia profiting from worlds built with human blood. And I understand that you're now afraid because for the first time in your species' existence, you're facing an enemy that you can't simply overwhelm with superior numbers. The communication link crackled with static as multiple alien voices tried to respond simultaneously. Sarah let them argue for a few moments before speaking again. You have 30 seconds to accept our original terms, or we will begin demonstrating exactly what humanity learned during our 3,000 years in exile. Admiral, we need more time. 20 seconds. This is unreasonable. 10 seconds. Admiral, please. Time's up. Sarah nodded to Commander Park, who immediately activated the tactical communication system. Throughout space around the council station, human vessels that had remained hidden suddenly revealed themselves, their weapons systems coming online with the distinctive energy signatures that had once terrorized the galaxy. But instead of firing, they began broadcasting. The transmission that echoed across every communication frequency in the system was music. Specifically, it was the human battle hymn, the Marines' hymn, played at a volume and intensity that overwhelmed most alien auditory systems. But more than just music, it carried with it a message that every species in the galaxy understood instinctively. This was the sound of predators announcing their presence. Demonstrate, Sarah ordered quietly. The human fleet, moving with precision that seemed almost supernatural, began a tactical display that showcased exactly what 3,000 years of technological development had achieved. Ships that had seemed stationary suddenly accelerated to impossible speeds. Weapons that appeared to be simple energy cannons revealed themselves as something far more sophisticated. Most frightening of all, the aliens began to realize that human vessels could appear and disappear at will, striking targets throughout the system before vanishing back into apparent empty space. It wasn't a battle. It was a demonstration of absolute technological superiority delivered with surgical precision. Within minutes, every alien military installation in the system had been disabled, every weapon platform neutralized, every defensive system rendered inoperable. Not a single life had been lost, but the message was unmistakable. Humanity could have destroyed them all, and chose not to. Now, Sarah said as the demonstration concluded, let's discuss this again. But this time, understand that you're not negotiating with a species asking for mercy. You're negotiating with a species that's choosing to show mercy. The silence that followed lasted nearly a full minute before High Archivist Kolvraxi's voice broke through the communication link. Admiral Chen, the ancient being said, I believe the Council is now prepared to discuss your terms in a more realistic fashion. Sarah smiled, and for the first time since humanity's return, it wasn't a cold expression. High Archivist, I was hoping you would see reason. Shall we begin with territorial restoration, or would you prefer to start with reparations? The negotiations that followed lasted 18 hours and resulted in what historians would later call the Treaty of Return. Humanity regained control of their former territories, received technological and resource reparations sufficient to rebuild their civilization, and most importantly, secured binding guarantees that genocide would never again be considered an acceptable diplomatic solution. But the most significant outcome of humanity's return wasn't military or political. It was psychological. The galaxy had learned that some things, once lost, could return stronger than ever. They had learned that humans, despite being scattered and nearly extinct, had never stopped being human. They had learned that the myths they told their children sometimes came true. And in the deepest archives of every major civilization, new entries were made in the historical records. They were brief, factual, and terrifying in their simplicity. Remember, humans don't give up, ever. 3 months later, Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the rebuilt Earth station, watching as human colony ships departed for worlds that had been empty for 3 millennia. Behind her, the lights of New Geneva glittered in the darkness, a symbol of humanity's refusal to be erased from the galaxy. Commander Park joined her at the viewport. "Admiral, the last of the reparation shipments have arrived. The reconstruction fleets are reporting ahead of schedule on most projects. It appears we're actually going to pull this off." Sarah nodded, but her expression remained thoughtful. "James, do you think we did the right thing? Coming back like this, forcing them to face what they did?" "Ma'am," Park replied after considering the question, "I think we did the only thing we could do. We gave them the chance to do better than they did 3,000 years ago. Some of them took it, some of them didn't. But at least now our children will grow up in a galaxy where being human isn't a death sentence." Sarah smiled as she watched the colony ships disappear into hyperspace, carrying the future of humanity to worlds they would remake in their own image. Then it was worth it. Every year in exile, every battle, every sacrifice, it was all worth it to see this moment. In the depths of space, the last human fleet continued its patrol of the dark nebula, watching and waiting. Because humans had learned something important during their 3,000 years of exile. Peace was worth fighting for, but it was only kept by being prepared for war. The galaxy had learned to fear the myths that came true. Humanity had learned to ensure they stayed true. And in the void between stars, where ancient weapons had once lit the darkness, new lights began to shine. The lights of human civilization returned to take its place among the stars, stronger and wiser than ever before. The myths had become reality, and reality, as it turned out, was more terrifying than any legend.